Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry to interrupt your lunch and lively conversations. My name is Ryan Schermerhorn. I'm the chair of the Midwestern Planning Committee, former president of the Chicago Lawyers Chapter. Pleased to introduce a surprise guest. We have State Senator Steve McClure. He represents most of Springfield, and I've been told that his new district, thanks to the Illinois Democrats, involves 10 counties. And part of his neighborhood has been gerrymandered out of his district. So, but in any event, we're very happy that he could join us, and he's going to give some remarks on President Lincoln.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if you go across the street from my house, you're no longer in my district. So that's what we've come to right now. But I do want to talk about President Lincoln because every year when we have his birthday celebration at his tomb, I typically give a speech. I've done it 3 out of the last 4 years. And you sort of research every year to make sure that you're aware of any anecdotes that might be beneficial and anything that you can use. And so there's a few things that always sort of caught my eye with President Lincoln. And one of which is, if you see these days and you turn on a newscast and there's a celebrity talking about President Lincoln or something from that time period. I saw Steven Spielberg, for example, talking about President Lincoln, and he said, if Republicans these days were like President Lincoln was in those days, we'd all be Republicans. And it's a very odd statement to make about the acting community in general, because President Lincoln, of course, was murdered by the most famous actor in America. And we hear from the media as well. And the media says things like, oh my gosh, President Lincoln, what an incredible president. If only Republicans were like that today. When you take the tour of President Lincoln's museum, I believe you're going to do that this afternoon, there's a whole hall with all the media clippings from President Lincoln that attacked him and roasted him. He was attacked worse than any other president in American history. They were brutal to him. It was horrible the way that they treated him. But now all of a sudden, after time has passed, it's okay to say that President Lincoln was a great president. You just sort of wonder, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, what Republicans these days would be considered to be great all of a sudden from the same people that would bash them if they were still alive. But, one of the things that I think is also left out of the depictions of President Lincoln in the movies or elsewhere is what he was really like. And President Lincoln, of course, we all know he was very tall. He wore the big hat, the stovetop hat, and he had trouble finding suits that would fit him right because he was 6'4", he was extremely thin, and there was a case where he traveled to assist some other attorneys at a trial, and they were so embarrassed by his appearance that they didn't want him to speak at the trial. Imagine not having one of the greatest lawyers of all time, let alone the greatest president of all time, speak because you were embarrassed by the fact that he couldn't find clothes that fit him. But and people that saw him when he debated Douglas and when he gave public remarks, they commented that first you were shocked by the way that he looked because he was unusual looking based on the figure at that time. And the suits didn't fit him right. But when he would start speaking, you were also sort of taken aback because he had a very high-pitched voice. But supposedly it really carried well. So it would have been a good radio voice perhaps, but very high-pitched. And one thing that they never get right in the movies is he had a southern accent. And he would pronounce words in a way that many, people from New York would not have appreciated. But he spoke very slowly. And he was very deliberate in his movements. And while at first it would be very awkward to watch him speak, within about 5 minutes you'd forget about all those things because you listened to what he said. And there's only one instance that I could find where he gave someone advice as to public speaking, and it was an instance where he wanted someone to read something to the audience that he had written. And all he said was, speak slowly. And that's what he did. And I think lots of us attorneys, when we're in court, particularly when we're trying to make arguments against something that's happening that's bad, we talk really fast. But President Lincoln spoke slowly, and therefore, at the end of the day, no matter what he looked like, no matter how he sounded, no matter how awkward his movements were, everyone knew what he said because he spoke slowly and clearly. And I think that's important to remember. The other thing that I saw that I thought was interesting about President Lincoln was that he always had a piece of paper and something to jot down notes, because he would be walking around and some sort of a line would hit him. He thought, man, that would be great for a speech. And he'd write it down, he'd put it in his hat. And so some speeches he wrote just based upon taking his hat off and finding all these papers he'd collected inside of them. But, we have, I get thoughts in the middle of the night sometimes. And I thought, man, that would be a great thought. But I've started to try to write down things, because you never know if you're in court or if I'm giving a speech somewhere where the line might be appropriate. So those are just the things that President Lincoln, I think common things that he would do that I think are helpful to all of us. But the final thing I want to touch on with President Lincoln is that you hear a lot about all of the incredible accomplishments that he had. And it's unsurpassed, as far as I'm concerned, in American history, not just as a leader, as a president, but as a human being. He was self-taught, etc. But you don't think about the fact that the circumstances under which he performed these incredible feats were horrendous. I mean, he lost a small child before he even became president. He goes to be inaugurated, and there's a plot to kill him on the way to Washington. He loses another small child in the White House. He's in the midst of the Civil War, where people are dying every day. And then just, I think, August of 1864, just a few months before he was eventually assassinated, he was riding in Washington, D.C., riding his horse. And there was a loud pop, and he was riding. The horse was called Old Abe. That's what he called the horse. And loud pop, and his hat flew off. And when the soldiers went to find his hat, there was a bullet hole through it. So can you imagine drafting the Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation Proclamation, fighting the Civil War? That in and of itself, those are incredibly difficult tasks. But to do it at a time when you don't know when there's going to be someone that's going to come try to kill you, you've got family that's dying, he suffered with depression, he had health problems. But I think the incredible thing about President Lincoln is not just what he did, but under the circumstances with which he did it. And I can't think of anybody that would be able to do it aside from President Lincoln. And so because of that, I think he is our greatest president. We have Lincoln Day dinners, of course, all over the country. The longest Lincoln Day dinner, of course, is in Springfield. We just had it last week. It was the 118th annual Lincoln Day dinner. But what an incredible legacy, what an incredible person. And no matter what happened to him, he was able to do incredible things. And no matter what happened to him, he was incredibly kind. And one of the things that you'll find if you research a lot about President Lincoln is all the pardons and things that he did that he didn't have to do, because he never lost his empathy and he never lost his ability to remember where he came from. And I think that's what all of us in public service should try to aspire to, is someone who doesn't make excuses. You do what has to be done the best that you can, and you never forget that you're there to serve the people, and you never forget that you need to be kind. And so for that, we honor President Lincoln every year. I think he's maybe the greatest leader, I think, in the history of the world, in my opinion. But because of that, it's an honor to live in his town and to be in his library. And I hope that you all enjoyed the museum, and thank you very much for visiting Springfield. I hope you come back very soon. Thank you.